Hey, April.
Yeah, Simon?
How do chickens leave the building?
I don't know, Simon. How do chickens leave the building?
Through the exit. Get it? I rather like that one.
Oh, that's cracked.
Really? Hi everybody, and as you've discovered, I am Simon Majumdar, and welcome to a brand new episode of Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. This is the 10th season of Eat My Globe. Woo! Yes, so thank you very, very much for everyone who listens to Eat My Globe. And on today's episode, we're going to look back at the origins of chickens and, of course, eggs. And don't worry, we shall get back to the two rather excellent jokes later on. See what I did there? Chicken is an animal whom, according to Poultry World, has become the most significant contributor to the increase of meat consumption in the world between 2000 and 2019. Now, these figures do include other poultry, such as ducks, geese, quails, pheasant, etc. But the majority of this, the poultry number, see what I did there again, would be chickens. In fact, Poultry World says that in 2019, the consumption of poultry had almost doubled from 2000. What a thing! And according to Food and Culture Organization of the United Nations, in 2020, chickens made up nearly 94% of all the poultry in the world. They are also the most numerous domestic birds on the planet. To put that into perspective, that would be around 24 billion chickens alive on today's numbers. That, to put it frankly, is, well, quite a lot. It would be the equivalent of 136.76 metric kilotons of chicken consumed throughout the world in 2023. And also, each person in the world eats an average of 161 eggs per year, which is also extraordinary. He, and indeed he. Now, it's hard to believe that this now ubiquitous bird, that sounds like a band from the 1960s, had such an interesting beginning. The first question, of course, is how did the chicken and the eggs get their names? According to Bon Appetit magazine, the term chicken is actually derived from the Old English term chicken, spelled C-I-C-C-E-N, but pronouncing that first C as ch, where it is used to describe a group of baby birds. There were other descriptions to describe other types of chicken, such as capon, which the Romans used to describe a castrated male chicken. It literally means to cut off. Pullet means a young chicken, which comes from the French word poulet for the feminine version, and poulet for the male version. And rooster, meaning a male bird, and the term fowl was previously known for the animal we now call chicken. And as for the egg, its name goes back to pre-Indo-European history, but the Old English word was egg, which is like the letters A and E kind of smushed together, and this meant the word bird. In Middle English, it became I, or its plural form, iron. In the 1300s, the Old Norse called them egg, which lightly stemmed from the Old English ugg. The Old Norse usage won out by the 1600s, when people stopped calling them iron and started calling it eggs. And now, obviously, we say the word eggs. While some may claim that the chicken probably had its origins in Thailand, Myanmar, China, India or Pakistan, a scientific paper in 2021 found that it likely came from Thailand, where chicken bones dated back to 1650 to 1250 BCE. Famous scientist Charles Darwin and subsequent DNA testing point to the Southeast Asian red junglefowl as the chicken's ancestor. It is known in Latin as the Gaius gaius. It is believed that the earliest farmers, known as the Austronesians, who lived in China into Southeast Asia, began to take the chickens with them as they moved towards the surrounding area. At some point, this animal was mixed with another bird known as the Gaius sonorati, a grey junglefowl that originated in India. Now, whatever the full story, this is the current theory of the formation of the sort of chickens we might be familiar today. It led to today's chicken known as Gaius gaius domesticus, although I would like to think that the Gaius gaius domesticus didn't fall too far from the poultry. You got it? I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of jokes here.
This is foul.
Oh dear. Here we go. Archaeological evidence suggests that this first chicken began to be domesticated some 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. In fact, the chicken has a direct link, believe it or not, to the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It does. In 2003, two scientists, Jack Horner and Mary Schweitzer, found an unfossilized collagen molecule inside the femur of a T-Rex. This discovery came by accident while transporting the dinosaur bone from a site where they had to break the bone so it could fit in their helicopter. They discovered the T-Rex collagen, which they then put against the collagen of living creatures. One of those matched with, you guessed it, the chicken. Well, and also ostriches. After the chicken, the next creature that was the most similar to the T-Rex was the alligator. So that's a little fact you can take with you to bore people with at dinner parties. You are welcome. Many archaeologists believe that the spread of chickens began where towns began to produce rice and millet on a regular basis. They posit that the red junglefowl would have been attracted to the crops, and living near these fields made them susceptible to be caught and domesticated by humans. Whatever the reason for the spread of chickens, they began to move around the globe on what Dr. Hanneke Meyer calls, in the Guardian newspaper, quote, a grand tour, end quote. The first thing to point out is that chickens cannot or can barely fly. This inability to fly makes its movement reliant on its own abilities to shuffle along the landmass itself, and more importantly, its acceptance of being taken wherever the owners decided to take it. Studies show that chicken arrived in places such as Mesopotamia at around the time of the late 2nd millennium BCE. It also went to areas such as the Mediterranean areas of Europe and to Ethiopia around 800 BCE. And from there it went to places such as Britain around the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE and to France around the same time in history. While farmers and farming may have helped with the spread of chickens around the world, it is believed that the early humans initially used chicken in, quote, ceremonial or symbolic role, end quote, because they were found in burials and texts and figurines in China. In ancient Britain, chicken bones were found intact with no sign that it had been eaten, and Julius Caesar once commented that, quote, the Britons consider it contrary to divine law to eat the chicken. They raise these, however, for their own amusement or pleasure, end quote. And elsewhere during this early history of chickens, it appears that they have been used for cockfighting. Another theory for the spread of chickens around the world is its ability to battle it out in cockfighting competitions, where the dead animal would be offered to the deities of the area. In ancient times, the game of cockfighting was popular in India, China and Persia. Indeed, one of the first known cockfights was held in 517 BCE in the town where the ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius lived. Cockfighting then moved from being just a religious ritual to one where breeding and training the birds became an art form that resulted in profit. Supposedly, cockfighting first began to spread to Europe with a Greek general named Themistocles. He lived from 524 to 460 BCE and is probably more well known for the Battle of Salamis, where he outwitted the Persian navy. As he was preparing to go to battle, Themistocles allegedly spotted two gamecocks fighting and made his soldiers watch in an effort to inspire them. He supposedly proclaimed, quote, "Behold, these do not fight for their household gods, for the monuments of their ancestors, for glory, for liberty, or the safety of their children, but only because one will not give way to the other." End quote. From there, it spread through ancient Rome. This was a civilization where cockfighting was first dismissed as, quote, "Greek diversion," end quote. But later it became so popular in the region that cocks were written about by authors by Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella and Marcus Terentius Varro in their respective books about agriculture. Varro says about breeding them, quote, "They must choose the cocks that are muscular, with a red crest, a short, full-pointed beak, grey or black eyes, light-coloured red wattles, a variegated or gold-coloured neck, the inside of the thighs hairy, short legs, long claws, large tail, close pinions, which are also erect and crow often, pertinacious in fight, and which not only do not fear the animals, which are hurtful to the hens, but which fight for them." End quote. Now, what is also interesting is that in Rome, the chicken was thought to be related to an Iron Age god, which the Smithsonian magazine describes as, quote, "Similar to Mercury, the Roman god of shopkeepers and merchants, travellers and transporters of goods, and thieves and tricksters," end quote. It was also thought to be the way that cockfighting spread throughout the Roman territories, with people such as Julius Caesar taking the sport with him on his travels to places such as Britain. From there, the chicken went through the rest of southern Europe, Sicily, and through the Low Countries. The chicken arrived in Spain likely through the Phoenician traders around 776 to 540 BCE in the areas of the Rhine and the Danube rivers, likely through trade with the Celtic peoples in the late 6th and early 5th century BCE, and throughout medieval Europe through Christianity, and from there much later on to the Americas, but we shall get to that later. What that meant was that cockfighting shed its ritualistic history and became a very popular non-religious sport. As Andrew Lawler notes in Slate magazine, quote, "The sport became a place for men of many classes to meet, take financial risks, and watch male animals demonstrate raw courage," end quote. And in the 18th century, in the US, Elaine Shirley, manager of rare breeds for Colonial Williamsburg's coach and livestock department, puts it, quote, "Cockfighting was the second most popular sport after horse racing. Everyone went. People from every class owned gamecocks," end quote. Now, while many countries have banned cockfighting, there are still those that allow it, which makes me think it is one of the oldest sports that still exists. perhaps even the oldest. Well, now we have cockfighting out of the way. Well, not quite, but perhaps we can continue with the more pressing question of how the chicken got to be some of the most eaten meats and eggs some of the most eaten proteins in the world. While the gamecock was already beginning to spread around the world, the edible bird was a bit later to the party. In a city called Mareshah, in what is now part of Israel, archaeologists think that this city holds the proof of when the chicken started to be eaten. This is a city that was at its peak from around 400 BCE to 200 BCE. Now, this is obviously quite a bit later in the cycle of the chicken that started around 10,000 years ago. The archaeologists came to the conclusion that people were eating chicken and not just using them for religious purposes or for cockfights because they found a lot of chicken bones, significantly more than those found in other archaeological sites where they found chicken bones. And unlike those other sites where archaeologists found bones of cocks at the ratio of 3:1 for male against female, the majority of the chickens being slaughtered for food in Mareshah were female. In fact, it numbered nearly in a ratio of 2:1 for female against males. The chicken bones also had butchery cuts. Archaeologists suggest that chicken became a food source when it reached Mareshah because chicken adapted to the, quote, relatively dry Mediterranean environment. That led to various morphological changes over time, end quote. The find in Mareshah suggests that the spread of chicken as a food source originated in the Levant around the 1st century BCE. As the chicken spread as a food source, it became highly prized. Indeed, in ancient Greece, chickens were so valued that there was an anecdote about a gentleman who did not want to go to the public baths while he was boiling his chicken because he thought his servants might steal the chicken broth. When a friend suggested he should ask his mother to watch the pot, he supposedly responded, quote, "Am I going to trust chicken broth to my mother?" End quote. Ouch. My mother would never. Anyway, around that time, it appears that ancient Romans liked to eat omelettes, as well as, I am told, chicken stuffed with mashed brains. In fact, chicken was also so desired amongst the ancient Roman fine diners that it became popular to fatten up the birds before selling them. As authors Jerry Adler and Andrew Lawler note in the Smithsonian magazine, quote, farmers began developing methods to fatten the birds. Some used wheat bread soaked in wine, while others swore by a mixture of cumin seeds, barley, and lizard fat. End quote. I do rather like the sound of wheat bread soaked in wine. It makes me feel peckish. I'm really sorry. I know. Moving on. Fattened chicken became so popular that a law called Lex Fonia was passed in 161 BCE, which forbade a family and their guests to eat more than one whole chicken per meal. However, to get around this law, ancient Romans found a loophole and had already come up with their own solution, which was the creation of the capon. That is a male bird that had been castrated. Apparently, castrating male birds naturally fattens them up. Who knew? However, once the Roman Empire began to flounder around September 476 CE, the popularity of chickens as food became a thing of the past. But the chicken would rise again. By around 1000 CE, the Catholic Church began to ban red meat or animals with 4 legs on fast days. Those lasted about 130 days per year. Red meat included pork, beef, lamb, and goat, for example. The ban was meant to show self-discipline. This led other people to look for other meats to supplement their diet. To comply with the church's rule, people found poultry as ideal. This red meat ban may have led to the evolutions of chickens. The evolution occurred with the development of a TSHR variant relating to the thyroid that fattens up chickens. Don't ask me to explain the science of it all, but from what I can gather, this variant did not exist until about the time of the red meat ban. The theory goes that people started eating more chickens and thus breeding more of them. And in breeding these chickens, they selected those that laid more eggs and those that were bigger. As they got bred, this variant that allowed for bigger chickens developed. So there you go. Thanks to the Catholic Church and their red meat bans for our bigger chickens today. Moving on to the Middle Ages, according to Philip Slavin, author of Chicken Husbandry in late medieval Eastern England, circa 1250 to 1400, quote, chicken meat constituted an important part of everyday diet, and it was afforded by virtually every social stratum, both in England and the continent, end quote. So chickens had now begun to move from the manor houses to the peasantry. Let me fast forward to the 19th century and to Queen Victoria's adoration of her hens. It was in 1843 she was taken with a particular gift of a Cochin China fowl and Brahma fowl. Indeed, so taken was she that she would send eggs across the globe to various royal relatives. Now, one is not suggesting that she ate the royal hens, but according to Annie Gray's book, The Greedy Queen, it did not stop her from eating chickens during her lavish dinners. A decision I would think was followed by royal watchers. This seemed particularly true in the United States, a nation that, despite its recent part to not be part of the colonies of Great Britain, still apparently, as the New York Times notes, quote, pored over periodicals that presented the Hanoverian success and failures in highly personal terms, a fascination that continued throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, end quote. There is a disputed theory that Polynesians took the chickens with them to South America before Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas. This theory is based on radiocarbon and DNA testing of chicken bones found in Chile that date back to around 1321 to 1407 CE. Because of how much older these chicken bones appear to be, the theory suggests that the Polynesians first arrived in the Americas before Christopher Columbus, who sailed into Hispaniola on his second voyage of exploration in 1493. The theory further goes that when Francisco Pizarro arrived in Peru in 1532, he saw that the Incan communities already had chickens with them, and those chickens had already been part of the community. Other scientists dispute that theory based on a comparison of the DNA of Polynesian and South American chickens. Testing shows that these chickens were, quote, genetically distinct, end quote, which suggests that the South American chickens are unrelated to the Polynesian chickens. They also note that the Pacific rat, which stowed away with the Polynesians during their travels, cannot be found in South America, thus strengthening the claim that chickens did not arrive with the Polynesians before Columbus. So I guess no one could still answer the question, why did the chicken cross the Pacific? Oh, God. Oh, dear. Okay, see what I did there again? Anyway, while we may not definitively know how chickens arrived in South America, we do know that the English colonists took chickens with them on their voyage to what is now the USA. And in 1623, when the Wampanoag leader, Massasoit, fell ill, probably from typhus, Edward Winslow, a pilgrim diplomat, offered to make him chicken soup. So even then, it seems like chicken soup has always been seen as restorative. In the 1700s, chickens were abundant in the American colonies. Ed Cruz, from colonial Williamsburg, notes chickens, quote, appeared on plantations and middle-class farms, around slave quarters, in cages aboard ships at sea, and in the streets of cities and towns, end quote. However, despite the ubiquity of chickens, Americans in the colonial era preferred to eat pork and beef. The chicken, however, was popular in the southern US. Author Emmeline Rood argues that the chicken's popularity in the South was down to the dunghill fowl, chickens that were thought to have stopped laying eggs, and which the enslaved were able to take as their own livestock, when they were unable to have pigs or cows for their own usage, although they might have been given some of the pig and cow parts. Many began selling the, quote, feathers, eggs, and meat, end quote, to support themselves when they became known locally as, quote, the general chicken merchants of the South, end quote. However, by the middle of the 1800s, Americans started to eat less of the chicken and more of the eggs, and by the end of the 19th century, chickens had become a much rarer item as people moved towards the cities. So you had the enslaved with their stock, but you also had workers in the city where the supply was limited and the prices astronomical. As Emmeline Rood puts it, quote, of food only largely available during the spring, the exorbitant costs of a chicken for sale in city markets elevated the food from pedestrian Sunday supper into something, as the ladies' magazine Good Housekeeping remarked in 1885, sought by the rich, because it is so costly as to be an uncommon dish, end quote. Indeed, the chicken salad was the dish in the late 1800s. But chicken would become commonplace again. In 1877, a dentist who lived in Petaluma, California, named Isaac Diaz, created the first incubator, a machine that was capable of keeping eggs at the same temperature of the brooding chicken's body, that is, 103 degrees Fahrenheit. He later joined forces with one of his patients, Lyman Bice, who came to Petaluma for the healthy sea air and the soil of the region. In the early 1880s, Diaz, along with his neighbour Thomas R. Jacobs, patented a heat regulator for an incubator. Diaz started selling and manufacturing his incubator. Then, as one article in the Petaluma Historian described it, quote, in 1881, Bice, the Steve Jobs to Diaz's Steve Wozniak, joined Diaz in forming the Petaluma Incubator Company, soon setting up their factory in a former armory near the Washington Street Bridge, end quote. However, in 1884, Diaz died in a duck hunting accident. While there was no proof of foul play, a few articles described it as mysterious. Bice then began to manage the company alone and declared himself to be, quote, father of Chickendome, end quote. Petaluma became the egg basket of the world, and because of the incubator, by the 1920s, 1 in 5 eggs supplied in the United States would come from the Petaluma Incubator Company. The second development in making the chicken commonplace again would be the beginning of what became known as the battery farming of chickens. In the early part of the 20th century, this began one of the key ways of keeping chickens. Chickens were kept indoors and protected from predators, were fed at set hours with vitamins, and were kept in the same space as other chickens. This did, however, over time, led to a public outcry over this type of farming. In 2012, Europe banned the practice. In the US, some companies pledged that they would only use cage-free eggs to make their product. In 2021, Sentient Media says that chicken farming in battery pens is still going on here in America. And while it may make food cheaper, it has many adverse effects on the animals, like risk for injuries and diseases. We still have a long way in America to go on that front. And the third development in making chickens more commonplace again is the growth of fast food restaurants like McDonald's and KFC, who offer things like chicken McNuggets and most of the majority of the KFC menu at inexpensive prices. Prices that make chicken look like the cheap animal it has become today. Now, I believe there are some moves to move back to some of the heritage chickens, things such as the Jidori chicken, originally from Japan, or one of my favourites, the poulet de Bresse, which is what I believe and many others consider to be the best chicken in the world. A chicken that once tasted by Henry IV of France in the 16th century. He promised his subjects that they would always have poule au pot, or chicken stew, a truly glorious chicken. But the truth is, right now, chicken is still a cheap animal. However, it is still worth thinking of all those dishes that we've loved in the past. Oh, glorious southern-style chicken soaked in buttermilk and then fried until golden. The amazing chicken tikka masala, which you can find on my website with other chicken recipes. Chicken karage from Japan. Arroz con pollo from Spain. Peri-peri chicken, which the Portuguese took with them to Africa, which I also now have a recipe you can check on my website. Coq au vin, a rooster braised in red wine, one of my wife's favourite dishes. Inasal na manok from the Philippines, that is marinated in vinegar and spices before being placed on the grill and brushed with annatto oils. Oh, juicy kebabs from, well, everywhere. Lucknow kebabs from India, kebabs from Iran, Turkey, Armenia. Oh, ayam goreng from Indonesia, a delicious piece of fried chicken with tamarind and turmeric sauce. Well, I could go on, but if this episode has taught you anything, it is that wherever you go in the world, there will always have some chicken dishes you can try. Now, before we finish, let's deal with those two riddles. Our first question: what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it's actually more difficult to answer than some may suggest. Bird eggs evolved about 300 million years ago, according to New Scientist, and existed well before chickens were created. As we said, chickens existed around 10,000 years ago. And there is even a suggestion that the chicken evolved from the jungle fowl 58,000 years ago. So you could argue, based on that fact, that eggs have been around for millions of years and chicken only thousands of years. So the egg came first. However, as New Scientist points out again, it would take a chicken to create a chicken egg. So perhaps the chicken would have come first. I'm not sure if that clears up any of that riddle, but it's an interesting argument. And the second one, why did the chicken cross the road? Well, the obvious answer is to get to the other side. This was a joke that first appeared in a New York magazine. Oh, God. Oh, I didn't write all the jokes in here.
I did.
Yes. My missus wrote all the bad jokes in here. And I'm only reading some of them now. Okay. Excuse me. New York magazine called The Knickerbocker in 1847. The joke in that article actually goes like this. Quote, there are quips and quillets which seem actual conundrums, but yet are none. Of such is this. Why does a chicken cross the street? Are you out of town? Do you give it up? Well then, because it wants to get on the other side. End quote. Which is apparently a 19th century idea of anti-humour. Or perhaps foul humour. Oh, God. Oh, kill me now. Please kill me now. Oh, so there you go. Okay, folks. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, here's a joke that I wrote. Have an excellent week. Excellent week. Make sure to check out the website associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we use putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There's also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to join us on Patreon. Subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favourite podcast provider. Thank you and goodbye from me, and we'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe. Things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much But It's Ours and Producergirl Productions. We would also like to thank Sybil Villanueva for all of her help with the editing of the transcripts and her essential help with the research, and in the case of this, all her horrible jokes.